Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and I've got something fun today. I have been waiting for this video for a long time. I remember last year at the Senior Bowl asking these guys to record this, but it's finally here. If you guys do not watch NFL Stock Exchange, please go subscribe to them on YouTube. It's a fantastic show. They have weekly content. It's focused primarily on the NFL draft. There's a lot of NFL stuff as well. Throughout the year, they do fix your franchise for a lot of teams. It's a good way to get to know things around the league. And finally, for the first time, they've done a video on the Jaguars. So I want to talk about this because this is my favorite podcast out there. And, it's worth talking about because there are some really good things in this video. So I want to preface this first and foremost by saying if you have not watched this very long 1 hour and 33-minute video, I'm telling you right now, I recommend it to you. Go watch it before you watch my thoughts on it, just so you fully understand what they've talked about. I think that's important. I think their content that they're giving is far better than a lot of what I offer, to be honest. And so I recommend to you, go check that out before you listen to this. It's worth your time. They have a phenomenal show with Trevor Sikkema and Connor Rogers. So getting into my thoughts, though, we're just going to kind of walk through this. We're not going to watch any of it here. Obviously, I don't want copyright issues, and it's not my content, but I will talk about it. But one of the first things that they started with, they talked about how the Jaguars got here, right? Why are they in this mess? Going back pretty far, even to 2017. And basically, from that point on, they talked about what do you do with Trent Baalke? Is he staying? Is he going? Who they would bring in for GM and head coach? They talked about Ben Johnson. Would he be interested in this job? They talked about free agency. What players do you want to bring back? What players do you want to cut? Who do you want to go target? And then finally, draft talk, right? It wasn't just doing a mock draft, but it was also talking about, hey, what players, or sorry, correct that. It's talking about what do we do with the first overall pick? What's the asking price for that? What players are people going to come up for to number one to go get? Who's going to do it? And what's the cost for that? Because to me, that's a big question right now that, look, we have obviously a very easy schedule remaining, and we could end up not picking first overall. However, I will never underestimate the Jaguars' ability to lose. And honestly, I think they are going to have the first overall pick. And if you do, I think you're getting somewhat of a haul. I wouldn't say, the Caleb Williams, not getting the first overall pick to go get Caleb Williams or, what came of the Bryce Young trade. But I think you get a decent amount. So we will talk about that and, whether I think it's accurate or not. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. And your final warning, if you haven't watched it, go watch it real quick and then come back to this video. But starting out, the first thing you talked about, how did the Jaguars get? There's two things they mentioned. And this is going further back. The smaller of them was the year the Jaguars were good, kind of set them up in a draft class that was really loaded in 2018, especially, with Josh Allen at the top of it, players like that, where they couldn't go out and get them because they're picking at 29, right? And something they hadn't mentioned as well in that, of course, was the Jaguars passing on Lamar Jackson. I remember sitting on my couch downstairs, begging for them to take Lamar Jackson. Look, I loved the Blake Bortles story at the time. I like the guy, but I was like, we cannot keep doing this. Like, we need to swing for the fences and try to get a great quarterback. And I was no scout at the time. I was like a 17-year-old kid at that point. And it just happened to be that Lamar Jackson ends up being this great player. But man, you just wish, obviously, that they did a lot more with that draft class. And obviously, they went and got Taven Bryan, and Taven Bryan didn't work out very well, did he? But you start out there, and then you look at 2020. The really big bad draft class for this team. You've got all these extra picks because of the Jalen Ramsey trade. You got an extra first in 2020. You have an extra first in 2021, and then you have an extra fourth. I can't remember which of those years it was, but the Jaguars had a lot of picks in 2020. They had number 9, they had number 20, and there were some incredible players in that draft. What does Jacksonville go do? We all know what the answer is. Let's be real. They draft C.J. Henderson. They pass on Tristan Wirfs at number 9, partially because they drafted Juwan Taylor the year before, who it's sort of a. They're kind of talking about this where Juwan Taylor, he's okay as a draft pick, but you never extended him. He's never been a complete tackle. He's had a lot of penalties, doesn't have a good reputation because of that now. So, was that really a great draft pick? And then you consider that, yeah, you didn't end up going after a player like Tristan Wirfs in large part because of that. Because you had Cam Robinson and you had Juwan Taylor on this team. So that was very unfortunate. Taking C.J. Henderson there, obviously one of the worst draft picks I've ever seen, just given that the guy only lasted 1 year. And then you look at number 20, taking K'Lavon Chaisson. Now, I'll say, at the time, I actually wanted Chaisson. The reason why was because I wanted guys who wanted to be in Jacksonville. And that was the theme because, obviously, Jalen Ramsey had left that year. It was hard times for the fan base, and I just wanted people who wanted to be. And that's not really a good reason, right? Like, I've had a lot of learning in the last, half a decade plus of just what actually works in football, and I'm always learning. But K'Lavon Chaisson didn't work out. And you passed on some pretty good players there. One in particular, I think he goes by Justin Jefferson. That's what we're talking about here, right? You look at that whole draft class, you have those two major misses at the top. And then you get past that, and what did you do with the rest of it? The only two players I can really recall who've had any impact were Devon Hamilton, who you feel like you're probably overpaying at this point, and then you got Daniel Thomas. And that's it for a draft class with like 12 picks. So it's a really bad start with those 2 years. And that puts Baalke in a situation where he comes in and this team really was not good when he took over. Of course, there's a lot more it goes to it. Because Trent Baalke, well, the situation wasn't that great. He had every resource that you could ask for. He had 2 first overall picks. He had an extra first in 2021. He had an extra second in 2021 as well. I think that was from the Yannick Ngakoue trade. You have all this money. Jacksonville was in a great cap situation when Trent Baalke took over. If you're doing your job at a high level, this team would have been built for a Super Bowl by now. And they would have done a hell of a lot more than go 9-8 at their ceiling. But this is where we are, right? Because those resources have, in a lot of ways, been squandered. There's been very poor decisions. There were things that, they didn't really mention on the podcast because there's only so many things you can, think to talk about, of course. You look at Cam Robinson, right? He's not a terrible player. No one's saying that. But you had a player who was pretty similar as far as how talented he was in Walker Little behind him, who you decided to bench his entire career until now after you had basically paid out the entire contract for Cam Robinson. You threw away $50 million because of that. That's the kind of decision making that wastes those resources and puts this team in the situation they're in now, where really the only appealing thing as far as the resources you have is, yeah, the owner will let you spend a lot. Of course, you don't have as much cap space as you did before because you got a lot of void years that'll come up. And then you might have the first overall pick. So those are good things, right? But it's a lot of things that have been squandered. Now, the other thing with Trent Baalke, they talked about kind of his independent style of thinking and how he's a guy who just kind of does his own thing. He's a very old school person, right? If you don't have arms this long, you're off my board. You're going to suck in the NFL. Aiden Hutchinson, for example. That sort of thing. We'll actually get into that a little bit here. That was one of their next conversations. So, Walker over Hutch, right? This was a move that I think they explained very well. And what I mean by that is that they found the right balance between, the two truths in this. And what I mean is that Trayvon Walker is not a bad football player. There are people who desperately want to tell you that because they want this to be the most egregious thing in the world. Instead, it's egregious to say that Trayvon Walker is a borderline back. He's a good football player. He's a football player who's getting better every year. However, just because he is good does not mean that it is a good pick at first overall, right? And that's the issue here. And you look at Aiden Hutchinson, who, I would have probably said a year ago that the way Aiden's played, like, I still wouldn't have taken him at first overall. I think that draft class is just kind of difficult for the first overall pick and who would have been best, because a lot of these players, there's just questions about how they're worth that value. But at the end of the day, like, you look at how Hutchinson played this year before the injury, which, look, if injuries become a problem in the future even more, sure, we can throw that into context. But he was the best pass rusher in the league. So it's like, I know Trayvon's good at run defense, but it's far more important to be able to get after the quarterback. And Hutchinson was the best at it in the NFL this year. And you just get decisions like that, where instead of taking the obvious choice that, hey, this pick will work out, you're going to get a player who's going to be really good here. Trent Baalke has consistently swung for the fences. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. And the problem is that hasn't worked often enough. Really, to be honest, the only example I can give of where he took a swing and had a better result than he would have had doing the easy slam dunk pick was Brian Thomas Jr. It's a great selection, right? BTJ has been awesome this year. He should continue to be great for the Jaguars for a lot of reasons. And that's going to be a pick that's going to benefit this team for a long time. But of course, it also comes with all the other mistakes. And, you got a second round pick who's inactive almost every week. Maybe something comes of him, but he's not part of their plan today. Brendan Strange barely played last year. Tank Bigsby, he's finally playing well. But first year, didn't do like anything for Jacksonville. And you just get into all these kinds of picks, which, to be fair, like, not all those guys are massive swings for the fences. But there's a problem. When you're so set on, I have to look smarter than everyone else in the room, I can't just take the win that's in front of me, you get to where we are now. Now, they kind of felt like Trent Baalke might survive this whole situation. Just because of, Walker Little getting the extension, and does that mean something, right? Is that a sign that you're only making decisions for the future if you're going to be? The counterpoint to that is that he's never done a midseason extension. And it might be him trying to make some sort of move to make him look better, get your statement out there about how, hey, I drafted this player, I developed this player, and he's staying. Now look at the 2021 draft class, and this looks a lot better, right? Because this guy's worth this much because I said he is. That's kind of what I think is going on there more so. Of course, is it possible that Jacksonville makes a terrible decision and keeps him? Unfortunately, yes. You hope to God that isn't the case, because I don't know how I'll go through another offseason of dealing with Trent Baalke as a general manager of this team. But yeah, that's kind of where things are, and I don't know, honestly, how you could even hire a head coach who would take the job with him. I think it's kind of a situation where pretty much anyone who's going to interview with you tells you that, hey, I'm not working with him. Like, I've seen how many head coaches have got fired with him. I'm not going to destroy my football career over it. Think about how long it took Jim Harbaugh to get back into the NFL. He's a good coach. And the guy had to go to college for like a decade because of how things went in San Francisco. So, yeah, I don't think it's smart. I don't think it's something that'll happen. And I think even if they attempt it, it'll fail spectacularly for them, and they'll probably be forced to move on from Balky. Now, we'll talk about some of the suggestions they have. We'll talk mainly about the ticket of Ben Johnson and Ray Agnew, because those are the two guys that I'll probably be advocating for the most. I'll say that now. Doesn't mean they're the only people I'll mention. But what they said, basically, regarding Ben Johnson, because he's kind of the big fish here between the two of them. Obviously, you love Ray Agnew too, but Ben Johnson's the young play caller that you think can change things in Jacksonville. What they basically said was that if Trent Baalke's here, Ben Johnson's not taking it. I agree. I don't see how it's any different. But if you tell him, you say, hey, we're going to move on from Trent Baalke. We're going to let you bring in your own guy. Why don't you bring someone from Detroit? You know, Ray Agnew, who's been around. He can build the trenches. That's where his specialty is as a scout. That's an area you're going to want strong. We're going to let you bring him in. Would you like this job? All of a sudden, Jacksonville goes from dysfunctional disaster to now this is looking like one of the best opportunities. Maybe Chicago would be a place he'd rather go. I think that's the one destination that I'm a little concerned about right now. But at the end of the day, you know, that gets you very close to having that kind of hiring. The other idea that they threw out, and this is probably for me the second option of everything that's out there. I like Aaron Glenn a ton, but he's probably 3 for me. They threw out the idea of Liam Cohen and John Spytek from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Spytek is one of the best young, actually, I don't know if he's super young. I won't say that. He's one of the better assistants in the NFL, or someone who's not a general manager, someone who people think should have this job. You have Liam Cohen as well, who he's kind of moved around recently a bit, but he's had a really good offensive plan this year. He's succeeded without some of his best players. And you see what he's done in the run game, how he designs things, how he gets his offensive line going. It's really good stuff. It's smart. And so you can go watch videos on that, but Liam Cohen is a good offensive coordinator. And they're kind of thinking right now that realistically he's going to be gone at the end of this year. So that makes a lot of sense as a parent. And you kind of think about what kind of brand of football that Liam Cohen brings in. Similar to Ben Johnson, it's essentially a plan of playing physical, winning with the run game, winning in the trenches, and then having that elite passing attack that kind of feeds off all that stuff, right? And you can say a lot more about Ben Johnson, but that's the way that Cohen has described himself. And you can watch Tampa Bay, and you see a lot of that play. So those were the two main ideas they threw out. They also talked about potentially if you can't get these candidates, bring in like a Pete Carroll for a while. I don't like the short-term solutions. That was kind of the last of their options, but you know, it's not something I would be too interested in. Now, we'll talk a little bit about free agency. We'll kind of move forward to that. I'll try to move through this a little bit quicker. We'll talk about the players currently on the team, who gets cut, and just kind of the arguments for that. So they said Christian Kirk's gone. I agree with that. You talk about Evan Ingram, though. This is an interesting one. I really like Evan Ingram. Obviously, I think he's a great starting tight end. However, things you have to consider. The way his contract was structured with Jacksonville essentially made it to where the amount he's earned each year, it was supposed to be like $14 million plus. It's just over that. What he's earned so far is about $12.5 million a year. So you have extra money on this season. It's not guaranteed. You can move on from it. So the question, instead of that 14 or so million, it's if Evan Ingram is worth almost 16 million. And that's a large amount for a tight end. That's really high. You have Brendan Strange on this team. I think you consider that you can trade Evan Ingram, and I think it has to be an option. They went ahead and said you would cut him. My thinking with this, especially just because the salary cap, like, I don't plan to spend a lot of money. I think we should have excess. I think we should roll over. I think we should really watch how aggressive that we get in free agency and focus more on what we're doing in the draft. Every team will say that, but that's really where my priority is. So my thought process with this is it makes sense, but it makes more sense probably to hold on to Evan Ingram until after the draft, see who you get. If you're able to get in there tight end where you feel like that room would be fine without him, look to trade Evan Ingram. Maybe you get a third round pick, something like that. Who really knows the value at this point? And then you go into that next year. You got your guys. You still saved as much, trading Evan Ingram, but you were safe with it, right? You think about what they did with Zay Jones, basically the same situation, where they held on to him. They waited until they got Brian Thomas Jr. Once that happened, they let him go because, well, we don't have a spot for you. You're not guaranteed to be here. This makes more sense. But they were safe with it. You also have the conversation about Devon Hamilton. The way his contract has been, it's kind of the opposite of Evan Ingram, where the first year he earned well over his APY. It's actually structured pretty poorly the way this contract was. So he was supposed to earn, I believe, actually, we'll take a look at this. We'll go into it. Go to over the cap. I'll have to find my way here real quick. Okay. So cash paid out. So in 2023, he got his extension. I believe it was a $10 million signing bonus. It does not show here, but you can tell by all these bonuses. This is spread out over these years. So he got $10 million in this year paid out to him. And then in 2024, he's earned another about $10 million. So for what is really 1 year of extension, because 2024 was his first year that he's on the second contract, he's already been paid out $20 million. So you paid him $20 million to be a Jaguar this year. Essentially, that's kind of how I look at the value. So now in 2025 and 2026, it's not that $11.5 million a year. Now all you have left is 7.3 and 8.5 roughly. So it's not, is he worth 11.5 million? Is he worth like 7? And I think that's more debatable. However, I think you have enough people on this team. You've spent enough money to where you probably want to save this. You probably want to move on from him. You probably want to find a way to reallocate this money. That could be a guard. That could be a Kevin Zeitler would be a big name I would love to get. But that's kind of what I would think with the whole Devon Hamilton situation. But that was one they threw out as a cut. I would agree. I just want to note the way his contract is structured. They also talked about Andre Sisco, where, whether or not you want to extend him, he's obviously had a rough year. I would like to see if there's a way you can keep him around. I was wrong as far as saying I would have extended him before this year. That would not have worked out super well for the organization unless, he gets right back to form next year. It's what you hope. But I think we're at a point with Andre Sisco where it's hard to know what the value is going to be, but he's probably going to have to take a flyer with the team. And that's kind of the conclusion that they came to as well. So we talked about players that are here. Who do you cut? Who do you try to bring back? And I think that's all fair points. I would generally agree with a lot of that, just maybe not all the timetable. So we'll get into free agency. So some names they threw out. The top thing they talked about was getting a cornerback, and this is where I would disagree with the strategy. You're in a situation, if you're where you are in the draft right now, you got Tyson Campbell, outside corner. You have Jarion Jones in the slot. You feel great about that. If Travis Hunter is a Jaguar, he should be. You're not benching him when he's on defense, right? You're not putting him in at corner for some of the game. The question, if he's not full time on both sides of the ball, is how much he plays on offense. That's where the uncertainty comes in. So I don't think you need a corner, especially if you're picking that high and you know Travis Hunter is going to be your pick. So I kind of view that as a waste of money, to be honest, because you're not going to have four corners on the field. And either way, you're either drafting you're sitting a valuable draft pick, or maybe you're saying a guy who's earning what, over 10 million a year. That's not really a great situation. You also have conversations about defensive tackles. They mention a lot of these like younger guys who are coming off of rookie contracts where they haven't played great, but they've been solid. Teams might not be able to pay them. Defensive tackle, to me, it's a really hard market to get in on in free agency because it costs so much, and I feel like the results are very hard to bet on. So I'm usually not a fan of signing. I think with what Jacksonville has right now, you're best off drafting at the position, but I wouldn't be against getting a player like they threw out, for example, Bobby Brown from the Rams, or Poona Ford from the Chargers, where these guys are they're playing fine football. We'll look at Poona Ford real quick. He's kind of a smaller guy at 5'11", but having a good year. Obviously 3 sacks is pretty good for the interior, grading out with an 83.5. Bobby Brown would be nice if you want to get someone who's a better run defender. He's a bigger guy at 6'4", 324, 4th round pick in the 2021 draft. Consistent tackler. He has 0 misses this year. Well, actually, look in the past, he has 2 misses over his entire career. So good tackler and generally a good run defender. He would probably be an affordable person that would have a pretty good impact for you and be a solid player. So I wouldn't really be against that as much. The other side of the ball, they threw out some different names. So we had James Daniels, Tevin Jenkins, and they threw out Zach Martin, who I'm not sure he would do it because of, well, he's been a Cowboy for life. He might retire with them. It's questionable whether he would leave. Looking at Tevin Jenkins, throughout his career, you look at the snaps, right? First thing you notice is probably injuries. So you go back to 2023. Doesn't play the first 5 games of the year. 2022. Misses 2 games here, maybe 2 at the end. You got a bye week somewhere in there. And then 2021 doesn't start until the end of the year. But the way he's played, he actually grades out pretty well. So it's an interesting player that maybe you can get to be cost effective. It wouldn't take a lot of money. You are going to have to probably play him at right guard if you got him, or have him be like a swing tackle, although I don't know if he'd play that just because you look at the snaps. He's played 157 at left tackle from his first year. He has not played there in 3 years, and he didn't grade out well. So Tevin Jenkins probably makes sense as a right guard for the Jaguars. You also have James Daniels, who started out the year really strong, looked great, got hurt, unfortunately. You see these grades are like just ridiculous. So you talk about a good run blocker, some good stuff right there. But obviously out for the season early in the Indianapolis game. Don't think he's going to play again this year. So probably not going to get a lot of money, but another value signing. They've mentioned him a lot on their videos. I'd be for that, just depending on the price, but he seems like a solid player to bring in. And then Zach Martin, right? He's a great guard. He struggled more this season, but you look at these grades throughout his career, just ridiculous. Consistently high 80s, low 90s. That's what an elite player looks like. That's what an all-pro looks like. You've got some rough games in here. That would be my concern. I mean, you got a 0 in week 6 against Detroit. That's brutal. I mean, that's really bad stuff. So I might not be as big on him just because of the age and, the name. You probably got to pay him something that's maybe a little bit too much. Plus, I'd like to get my long-term solution there. And if I'm going to get an older guy, if Zeitler's out there, I feel a lot more comfortable with him. So, kind of my thoughts on the free agents, but that's where they went with um, the positions primarily. That's what they went with. Now we'll move on. We'll talk about the draft here. So there was a lot of conversation about what is the first overall pick worth, and this has been something I've been researching a lot into. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll have seen a lot of my posts. I've put out questions about what people think it would be worth, what the cost would be. I have posted articles back from 2023, Ryan Poles quotes, talking about the deals they had on the table. One of them they talked about was if they wanted to move back from 1 to 2 and 2 to 9, the Houston Texans, it was inferred that they had offered an extra first round pick with that. And that on top of it, that between the two trades with the Texans and Panthers swapping back twice, they would have extra picks this year as well, or it would have been 2023 at the time. So it was interesting to me because I'm thinking, is this pick worth number 2 and a first next year? And I'm like, I don't know. It's close, right? Because I would be very happy if we're sitting here and saying this is, a trade that you can do for number 2, number 34, and a first next year. And I don't know if that's too likely. What they kind of threw out with this. Originally, Connor thought maybe 66 would be acceptable. 34 was what Trevor recommended, and I think that's kind of where it has to start. I agree with that point. I don't think you can bid against other teams from number 2 and give up anything less than that to get your franchise quarterback, especially if you're the Raiders and you want Shedeur Sanders, right? Because that's pretty clearly the matchup, or we'll say the grouping that they want is Shedeur in Las Vegas. You have to get that deal done, right? Because it's not just the Las Vegas Raiders that he's going to be willing to go to. There's going to be other teams that will be willing to move up, that want him, that he would go there. So you got to get that done, right? And I think that's worth something. I think that's worth 34 plus. And what they ultimately came to was doing number 2, number 34, and it was 103 from this year. Personally, I think the price is a little bit higher. And where I fall for it is I think we're probably looking at this being number 34 and a second next year, and you swap 1 and 2. I think that would be a fair deal. It doesn't involve first round picks. You're still getting a lot in return. They're paying the quarterback tax anyway. They're bidding against other teams. You're in the position of leverage there. They can't screw around because you can just tell them, okay, well, I'll trade back with the Giants. Or if the Giants are trying to screw you, maybe you say, okay, well, I'll trade with the Raiders. And, you'll lose out on your guy, and then you'll get fired because of that, because you didn't get the right one. So do you really have a choice in this, right? That's kind of what it comes down to. So that's where I would fall with this, where, I think you could get 2 seconds for the first overall pick at this point. And I'll probably change my mind a lot before we get to the actual draft if they hold on to the pick. Now, what was interesting after that was the idea of, do you want to package together 33 and 34, maybe another pick, to move up into the first round again for a player? And specifically who they threw out was Mason Graham. Now, actually take a look at this. We'll talk about trade value a little bit. We're not going to do a full-on mock draft here, but I'm just going to show you what the values would be. So let's go to Jacksonville. And we'll give ourselves 234. Let's say that future second. We'll force that trade. 52% chance. You're paying quarterback tax. I think it gets accepted. 33 and 34 on the trade value chart is 1,140. This is worth 14. It's almost worth 13. You can actually go back and you can look at a recent trade between the Vikings and Lions where Detroit moved up with Minnesota And they actually got the better end of the deal as far as the value. They gave up essentially, it was 32 and 34. It's almost the exact same picks. They went up to 11, but then they got to flip 66 and move up to 46. So maybe you actually don't have to settle for 14. Maybe you get higher. This is also a class where I feel like the value of these very high picks here, like, 1 through 8, let's say, it is immensely higher compared to what it is through the middle of the first round, because you get into a lot of players that they're kind of fringe first rounders, right? My board drops off really fast. So 33 and 34. Say you trade with San Francisco. This gets accepted. That would be fair value. You go to Dallas, still getting accepted. Miami, that's where it gets close. So somewhere around there, right? This gets you high into the first round just with these picks. If you wanted to, after you got this trade, you could do this anytime before the draft, right? Move up to number 12. You either stay there and take the player you want, or maybe you flip up again. Because, look, you got this extra pick from Minnesota in the third, one in the fourth. You've got an extra second next year. Imagine a scenario, right? They talk about Mason, right? And there's a lot of different players you can throw out here. But what if you're able to take those picks together? And this is just the excess of what you get for drafting Travis Hunter and trading back with what is really house money, if you believe in house money as a concept here. You're taking the excess of that. You're taking Travis Hunter at 2, and maybe it's Ashton Genty at number 12. Maybe you're trading Travis Etienne. Maybe you're moving off him. I think right now, the way he's played, he does not have to be a long-term asset for this team. Maybe you're planning to have someone else back here. And if you're looking at Ashton Genty, right, there's going to be the people who are literally like, doing self-harm right now because we're talking about running back in the first round, especially as like the team is picking first overall. If that's you, calm down. It's okay. You'll live. I'm not in charge of the Jaguars, so there you go. But Ashton Genty as a prospect, he's a player that we're not going to see most likely for a very long time come out in the draft, if ever, right? The guy's even from Jacksonville on top of it, which that's not why you're picking him, but talk about a good story. If I want to build this team the way I want to build it, I want to have an elite rushing attack. If I'm looking at Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen, I need to have a great rushing attack. I may prefer to start with the offensive line and have that built out before I bring in a running back. But you have other resources. You can do work on your offensive line. You can get a lot of that done. And you can still maybe decide to go get the player who's not going to be available again for a long time, if ever again, in our lifetimes. I'm not saying there will never be a good running back again, but an Ashton Genty doesn't come around every decade. So what if you do, right? It's just an idea to throw out there, and some of it's fun, Are the Jaguars going to do this in real life? Probably not. But I think it's worth fun. It's worth talking about just because it's fun. We'll put it like that. So there's my crazy idea. We'll look at what they did with their draft. Just talk about the players here. So this is what they had. They ultimately didn't do the trade because they actually fast forwarded before they were able to. Plus the players they wanted weren't there. But you got Travis Hunter, a number 2. Solid trade here. I'd like to get a little bit more, but that's okay. TJ Sanders and Gray Zabel, they're players that I believe I have in the second and third round right now. I would see both of these as drafting too high. However, I think they're both good players. I think they're both guys who would have some sort of impact. I think they'd stick around. I think Zabel would be someone who could start for the Jaguars. Maybe he's a guard in the future. There's even talk about him playing at center. I think that's maybe a little more questionable, but they were kind of comparing him to Graham Barton. It makes me want to go back and watch his film and see if maybe there is a comparison. Talk about Harold Fannin Jr. here. If you're getting a replacement for Evan Ingram, phenomenal choice, right? Harold Fannin Jr. is an awesome tight end. He's got some of the best highlights you'll see. He just does everything at a high level, even as a blocker. He's just small. It's the only thing. And so there'll be questions about projection and questions about, playing for Bowling Green, the talent level. Of course, he still had a great game against Penn State this year. So I don't fully look at that. I don't fully consider that as a massive detriment because I've seen him play against good teams. Jaden Higgins. I don't think he's going to be there at 92. I think I have him rated higher than that as well. But he's just a guy that, man, he's got the size. He's got the hands to bring in everything. Now, would it be redundant? I think it would. With Jacksonville, you'd have Travis Hunter. You'd have Brian Thomas Jr. If you're going to get another receiver, probably go after someone who's going to fill in maybe in the slot. That would make more sense. Now, my favorite pick here, other than Travis Hunter, of course, Kyle Monangai. You're going to see a ton of him to Jacksonville in my mock drafts all the way up until the draft. I think he's a great running back. I think he's someone who's going to go way too late in this class. I watch the way he plays. He bounces off contact constantly. He extends plays. He is as physical as it gets. And the way the guy runs, he doesn't have these huge exaggerated cuts or jukes or anything. But it's just these little moves where he's always able to evade defenders. He keeps his momentum going, right? He's just a fun player to go watch. And he kind of brings something different to Jacksonville. It's also a great pass blocker. You'll watch his receiving reps too. Look, he's not out there all the time as a receiver. But when he is, he runs good routes. He catches the ball. He does what you need him to do. I think he legitimately could be a player that you bring in who doesn't cost you a lot and could be the starter for this team. Alongside Tank Bigsby, of course, right? We're not throwing Tank into the trash here. Even if you got Ashton Genty, Tank Bigsby's going to get some snaps during the game. Not a lot with Ashton Genty, to be fair. Not many players will, but you're still using it, right? And so I would like to have a balance, and I think even if you have ETN here, Monangai would be a phenomenal add to this backfield and someone you're going to be happy that you have here. Now, Chase Lunt and Mikhail Kamara, I have not watched either of them. They might be players I add to my list at some point, especially if they get to the Senior Bowl, because I'll get to see them in person then. But, everything I heard of them sound like good values at that point. I'd be fine with that. But you see how many picks this team could have, right? If you're trading for just selections this year like they did, there could be a lot of new players coming to Jacksonville. But I also see this hey, we've got a lot of positions locked down right now, whether or not they're the best of the best. I think what this team needs, and needs to heavily consider, is trying to bring in those elite players. And that's why I'm sitting here flirting with the idea of moving 33 and 34 to go up in the first round, because you can get really high in the first round. Someone is going to fall in this class. If you can pair up Travis Hunter with that player, if it's Nash and Genty or Abdul Carter because he's short, or a Mason Graham, maybe he doesn't have long arms, or whatever it is. If you can do that, you can nail this draft, and you can really start to change the trajectory of this team very quickly. So ultimately, I love the discussion that they had. I think that Jacksonville, if they get things right, they're in a great situation this offseason. They have a lot of opportunities. They need to take advantage of them. And I really think it needs to be considered to go make a big move. You're going to have the capital to do it. You're going to have the players to go do it. Get it done. And to me, if I'm giving a suggestion right now on what they could do, as I said, if you could put Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter on the same team for the next decade, I think that would start what could be a golden era in Jacksonville. I know we said that when Trevor Lawrence got here. I know we've said that about other players, but that would truly be special for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm already prepared for the comments to disagree. That's okay. Completely fine with me. But that's all I've got for this one. I appreciate y'all joining me. Like I said, go check out that channel. They've got great content all the time. It's like half of my listening for podcasts. I listen to the stuff at work pretty much every morning. They've got great content. Want to shout out our channel members premiered us here in 904, Mr. Dolphin, Scrubber Ducky 500, and Brian Foster. Appreciate y'all coming on, watching, you guys for supporting me. Let me know your thoughts, of course, and no self harm. I've had plenty of people threaten that in the last week over running backs in the first round. It's okay, but let me know what you think. Right? That's all I've got. I'll see you in the next one. And finally, go Jags.